Hello, today our targets are to recall long division, use polynomial division to find factors of a polynomial, and to write a polynomial in factored form. All right, so we're going to start out with long division. So we're going back to elementary school when we first learned to do long division. And we start with the idea of 32 going into not 5. All right, it doesn't go into 5, so then we try 50. How many times does 32 go into 50? 1. Then your next thing you do is you multiply 1 times 32, and then you subtract. And 50 minus 32 is 18. You pull down the 2, and you ask yourself, 32 goes into 182. How many times? Well, 3 goes into 18 6 times. But if you do 6, it's going to carry times 2, that 1 will carry over. So 5 is the most we can use there. And now if I do 5 times 32, I end up with 160. Subtract those numbers, and I end up with 24, sorry. 22. We bring down the 4. And we ask ourselves, 3 goes into 22 about 7 times, because 30 times 7 would be 210. So then I take 7 and I multiply it by the 32, and I end up with 224 exactly. And so we get a perfect number. So 32 times 157 gives us 5,024. Why don't you go ahead and try this one on your own, and when you're done, check your answers. All right, hopefully you got 3,984. If you didn't, walk through the process, stop the video, and double check your work. All right, so those two happen to give us nice answers. However, we don't always get a nice answer, and so then once we don't, we have ourselves a remainder. So let's go ahead and do this one real quickly. So 72 goes into 383 5 times. You multiply that, you get 360. You subtract, you get 23. You bring down the 4. 72 goes in here. How many times? We're going to try 3 out. Multiply 3 times 72, and we end up with 216. Subtract. Bring down the 2. 72 times 2 will give me 144. Subtract, and we get 38. 72 doesn't go into 38, so we write 38 70 over 72, right, as our remainder. I'm going to put the plus sign there because that's going to come in handy later. And then, of course, you want to reduce your fractions. So we're going to write this is the same thing as 532 and 19/34. I just reduced 38 over 72. All right, now let's move it to polynomials. We are going to take the same idea that we did for long division and apply it to polynomials. So you first ask yourself, x times what gives me x cubed? Hopefully you say x squared. Then you take x squared and you multiply it by both the terms. So I have x cubed plus 3x squared. Our next thing we do is we subtract. These guys go away, and if I subtract 8 and 3, I get 5x squared. Okay, our next step was to pull down the next number. So in this case, pull down the next term. All right, then we ask ourselves, x times what gives me 5x squared? And that is a positive 5x, so I put that through. And now I multiply the 5x to everything. So 5x squared plus 15x. Our next step is to subtract again. So I'm going to subtract the 5x squared goes away. I subtract 17 minus 15 and I get 2x. Bring down that plus 6 and ask yourself x times what gives me 2x. You say just 2, and then we go ahead and multiply that 2 through to both terms, and we get 2x plus 6. The last thing we do is subtract, and we get 0. So this cubic divided by this linear, x plus 3, leaves us with the quadratic x squared plus 5x plus 2. All right, let's try it again. So I have x times what gives me 2x cubed. So your answer should be 2x squared. Then we're going to multiply. So I have 2x cubed plus 2x squared. Next thing I do is I subtract. Those go away. You're left with negative x squared. And then we pull down that minus 4x. Then you ask yourself, x times what gives me negative x squared? Negative x does. You multiply that through, and I get negative x squared minus x. Then we go through, and we subtract, so then this would become a plus, and this would become a plus. Those go away, and you're left with negative 3x here. Pull down that last minus 3. Ask yourself, what do I multiply x by to get negative 3x? Your answer is 3. Multiply that through. Negative 3x minus 3. Last thing we do is subtract, which turns that to a plus, and that to a plus, which gives us a remainder of 0. So x plus 1 times 2x squared minus x minus 3 will give us this cubic polynomial. All right, I'd like you to stop the video, try this one on your own, and then check your answer. All right, hopefully you found that this one actually ended up with the remainder. You just got to be very careful with your signs and going through. And so once I get that remainder 5, I just put 5 over x plus 1. Same thing that we did as far as when I had 38 as a remainder, I put it over 72. We can't reduce our fractions because 5 over x plus 1 doesn't reduce. All right, let's give it another go. So x times x squared will give me x cubed. Multiply it through. X cubed minus 4x squared. Subtract. Again, just be very careful with your signs. So then that turns it to a plus, and I have 3x squared. Bring down the minus 3x and do it again. It's a very repetitive process. So put that through, and I get plus 3x. Multiply that through, and I have 3x squared minus 12x. Subtract, which turns this into 9x. Bring down the minus 36. X times 9 will give me the 9x minus 36, and this one has no remainder. Okay, so sometimes we'll get nice clean answers, sometimes we won't. All right, let's do another one. This time I'm going to put a coefficient out in front of the x. So I asked myself, what times 2x gives me 8x cubed? Well, 2 times 4 gives me 8, and x times x squared gives me x cubed. Multiply it again through. So I have 8x cubed plus 4x squared. subtract, so those go away, and I end up with 14x squared. Bring down the 9x, and then 2 times positive 7x will give me the positive 14x. So I write plus 14x squared and plus 7x. Subtract, subtract. That goes away. I have, make sure you can see that, 2x. Last thing, bring down the 1, and you can see 2x plus 1 will go into 2x plus 1 one time. All right, now you try it with a coefficient and see if it works for you. Pause the video, check your answer when you're done. Okay, so I have the idea that that's going to be x squared. Multiply that through and I get 3x cubed minus 5x squared. Subtract. 12x squared. Bring down the negative 26x. Figure out what times 3 gives me 12. Well, that's positive 4. X times x squared gives me, or sorry, x times x gives me x squared. Multiply that through. And again, subtract. Negative 6x, last thing, pull down the plus 6. Try to figure out what times 3 gives me negative 6. Well, that's negative 2. And I don't need an x this time. So multiply that through, and I get negative 6x minus 10. Change your signs and add, and I end up with 16 as a remainder. And with that 16, I just put it on top of the oh, I made one little mistake, sorry. I should have minus 2 times minus 5 is initially plus 10x. So then when I subtract, sorry, I end up with negative 4. And so then I write minus 4 over my divisor, which is 3x minus 5. All right, hopefully that gives you a pretty good clue of how long division works, and you are ready to try the on your own and working class tomorrow. Have a nice night.